The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André, your podcast host. Big thanks to Uka the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in once again to, I guess, our Christmas edition of the show, as this episode is falling on the last Monday before the holiday. It is here. The holidays are here. You've waited. You've longed. You've bought the presents. You've wrapped them. They're under the tree. Hopefully, you're all done. You're sitting there drinking hot cocoa, some kind of candy cane liqueur, which I'm partial to at this time of year. You know, something festive. You know, singing carols, watching Christmas films, getting cozy by the fire, by the tree, watching the movies. I just recently rewatched the Christmas Carol, the Muppets Christmas Carol, which is my favorite version of that story. Partially for the nostalgia of me watching it as a kid, but also because I really like that version. I think Michael Caine's great. I think the supporting cast is great. It's amazing how the Hensons really capture magic by making Muppets feel like real characters, and you care about them, and you it's just a hand and some felt, and it's still, I don't know, man. He does a really good job of making you feel for these characters, and I had a great time. I recently discovered there was a version of it that had an extra song that I didn't remember seeing before. So on Disney Plus, if you go to the extras, when you look it up, there's the feature-length or full-length version, and if you click that, it'll show you the version of the movie that has the song added back in. I think they took it out because they thought it was too sad. It's basically about The Love Is Gone, I think it's called, which is about Belle singing about how, the love for Scrooge is lost because he's kind of becoming this money-obsessed miser, even at a young age. And it's a sad song, but they do a really good job. It's a fantastic addition. I'm glad to have seen the version that had it back in it. So if you're a fan of that movie as much as I am, please go check that out. So the great thing about this episode is my guest today is Wallace Ryan, who is the collectively known, they call him the Godfather of Newfoundland Comics. He's been around working in the industry in various ways for many, many years. He's kind of a zealot, if you will, of the comic industry in Newfoundland. Been around for the opening and closing of many comic shops, eventually lived in New York. And I got to work in the industry out there, rubbed elbows with a bunch of people in a bunch of different comic book worlds, and, knows quite a bit of people that have ascended to some pretty big heights in the comic industry. And still currently waving the flag in Newfoundland for comics and creating some great content over there, doing some really cool comics. And we get into it. We really talk, have a great discussion. Like a Newfoundlander, he likes to talk, and I do too. So we had a great conversation, a great chat, and he certainly taught me quite a few things about the comic industry in Newfoundland and how far it's reached in certain ways, certain areas. And he really cool guy. Wallace was a great conversation, and I know something about Newfoundlander. As a Canadian, we have a fondness for Newfoundlanders. I know I sure do. I know there's sort of a stigma sometimes that comes with them, a lot of Newfie jokes. I'm not super partial to those, but mostly because I spent time with them and I got to know the people, and just because their accent is thick doesn't mean that they're any less engaging, intelligent, creative, artistic than the rest of us. And I love Newfoundland. It's a great time, great place to visit, and I have a standing invitation to visit Wallace when I go, so I'm definitely going to have to make the trip sometime soon. Really cool guy and really cool chat. So let's get into it. Here it is, my conversation with Wallace Ryan.
Okay.
Hey, Wallace, how are you?
Not too bad. And yourself?
Oh, not too bad. Good to see you.
Nice and rainy out here. Just one province over today.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask how it was on your side of the Atlantic. We're on your edge of the Atlantic. But yes, it is very rainy and crummy here as well. So,
Do you know Fox Lidstone by any chance?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I wouldn't call him a great friend or anything, but I definitely know him. Yeah. You're a
Yeah,
friend or
yeah. We did a comic here in the '90s together, right?
really?
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. I didn't know he
Before we
did.
moved.
I didn't know he
Oh,
worked on comic stuff.
yeah. He did do. He'd also worked on a comic called The Dark
Oh,
for what was it? Continuum Comics.
really? I only knew him
Yeah.
as a cosplayer, really. I just see him at cons, dressed up as different cosplay kind of things.
Yeah. Oh no. He's a comic book guy.
Oh, that is cool. I love your studio, by the way. It's
Oh,
that's awesome. Yeah.
yeah. Actually, if I can turn on the light a bit.
Oh yeah, no, it's beautiful. I have a library room in my other part of the house it looks a lot like this, just full of
Ah,
omnibuses and various omnibuses. I've thankfully got a little bit into the Marvel Comics app, I can't think of it now. Marvel Unlimited, I think it is. So like, thankfully,
yeah.
it's made it a little easier to not have to get a hernia carrying around some of these volumes to read them, but it's pretty great. I love the physical book to take out and sit in your lap and kind of go through it.
Yeah, I moved. I moved. Well, I moved a couple of times with the library, but the last time when I moved here, this the house I shared with my brother, it was just like, okay, this is the last move I'm ever going to do, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and I inherited the house after he passed away, so it ain't going anywhere, right? This because you don't see it here, but I mean the room is filled. Actually, the only thing that isn't filled here, the two windows. Actually, yeah, the two windows, but basically the shelves go around the whole this whole room,
Wow.
and part of it's taken over part of my bedroom now too.
Yeah.
All the overload is gone there, so it's uh, I'd say pretty soon. I'm not sure what I'm going. Although I talked to people about uh, like Memorial University, people like that about rehousing the library somewhere because they have no collection of graphic novels and all that,
Mm,
and I must have, I guess, about 5,000 books here, right?
wow.
So,
I
so
wonder that
it's
myself.
starting
I'm like,
to.
what happens, if because I think my wife keeps me in check a little bit, and I have quite a few. It sounds like
Yeah,
you're definitely you have more than me, but I probably have about the same amount you have in that room. But it's like, what does happen if my time comes? I know she doesn't care about them, so it's it's nice to have something in place to make sure that they get given a good home, or at least, and thankfully the library here in town actually has a pretty decent graphic novel selection. I don't think they have enough space to house everything I do. I'd have to find something to a private library in someone's house or
yeah.
something, I guess.
Well, I had a comic book store in the '90s, and when I closed that down, I'd well, I sold off my childhood collection through that store originally. Uh, it was during when the cod fishery was shut down, and it was pretty rough economic times here. But when it started to get better, and I closed down the shop, I realized that I had no comics left, and it was a bit of a panic. But then I had a handful of Marvel Masterworks and all that, some of the early Marvel stuff and all that. And I figured, oh, well, I'll see if I can reclaim part of my childhood collection this way,
Mhm.
and not thinking that it would explode like it did. And then I ended up working at the local comic book store here with my buddy, and he gave me a real kick ass discount.
Yeah, that's where a lot of mine came from. I used to help out at a local comic store when it was here in town, or a hobby store that sold comics. And
Yeah,
I would basically work because it was just like a hobby. I would sort the comics or order comics for the people. So he would just pay me in credit, and then I could order things for cost. So I got an insane
yeah.
amount of things, like all these Gremlins, and I got this Infinity Gauntlet that's like and all these
Oh
great,
yeah.
yeah. And plus a lot of the books in the library just sort of overwhelms you at some point. So
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It was well, and it gotten to the point, especially in the past couple of years. Well, he passed away a couple of years ago,
mhm.
and his daughter took over. But I'd found, so I didn't get the discount I did. But I mean, my purchasing had gone down a bit anyway because I'd gotten, just about everything that I was looking for.
Yeah.
I get the odd Marvel omnibus or whatever, but even then I have a huge collection of masterworks. So, it's I'm not gonna double dip like I used
Yeah.
to double dip. And when I got laid off from the comic book store, I sold off all my double dippings.
Yeah, well, they keep doing that, right? Like you have these editions that are like these newsprint editions that are in black and white, and you get all those ones, and then they start bringing out the Masterworks ones, so you get those again in color, and they start
Yeah,
putting out these bigger omnibus ones that have the whole thing in one thing. Like I probably have Jeff Smith's Bone in like 6 different versions.
yeah,
I have like
yeah,
the big crazy one that puts it all in one volume that's in black and white, and then the
yeah,
Scholastic ones that are in color. And I don't want to give up the old cartoon book one collections I had because they're kind of cool.
yeah,
Because it's a sort of a bygone era, so it's neat. But I know what you mean. I find that because I collect too many different things. Like I collect records, I collect Blu-rays, and I collect comics. And it kind of gets to a point, especially with the Blu-rays lately, that it's like a lot of the ones that I really wanted, I got, like the 4Ks, the Blu-rays, or whatever, like of the movies that I really wanted. And records too. It's like I'm kind of getting to the point, unless I discover new music, that I really need
yeah,
to, get out there and do it. But cool. I'm excited to talk to you. This is neat. Like it's rare that a lot of the folks I talk to that do comics out this way are either very indie guys, which is great, or people that have come here from somewhere else. So the fact that I'm
yeah.
speaking with, in quotes, the Godfather of Newfoundland Comics, I think that's a really cool thing. So I assume you grew up in Newfoundland. You're
Yeah,
from
yeah. Born and raised in St. John's.
Ah, beautiful. I've been there many times. One of my many gigs is I'm a professional wrestler.
Okay.
So I've been on when LCW was running around there, Legend City Wrestling. I used to be up there quite often on tours, and usually they would end in St. John, but they would start. I'd land there, and then we go all over Newfoundland and Labrador, the smaller
Yeah,
communities. So I have a lot of fond memories of different parts of Newfoundland doing that, and I had my nose horribly broken in Harbor Breton one
ah,
time, yeah, in a match, and I had to wait until because it's like a long drive to get back to Grand Falls, Windsor, where the hospital
oh
was.
God,
So
yes.
I had to. I was sitting holding my nose together in a car with Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and driving back to Windsor, where they dropped me off at the hospital. So that was a fun one. But yeah, it was. It's a cool. It's a really nice, beautiful space, beautiful area, and
Yeah,
I kind of miss being there. I'd like to get back sometime soon.
yeah. The my studio here at the Library of Graphic Literature, as I call it, there's a place called Rollins Cross in downtown
Hmm.
St. John's, and it's the one of the more complicated intersections you'll ever see. And it was there, and that's where it's located,
Ah,
just off
okay.
that. And I'm in a house older than Canada.
Really?
Yeah, this one it's one of the rare ones in downtown because in the late 1800s there were two great fires. One burnt down the east side of St. John's, one burnt down the west,
Wow.
and there are a few surviving houses here and there throughout the city. And somehow, because the house on either side of me burnt down, but this one didn't for some reason. No idea
Preordained,
why.
predestined.
Oh yeah,
The gods wanted to survive. They wanted you to house that library in there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
it's well, it was from 1850, so it,
wow.
like I say, predates Canada and electricity.
Wow. That's
So,
amazing.
but it's
Um,
oh, go ahead,
no,
sorry.
no, I was going to say when did comics first, like, where did you first discover comics?
Ironically, well, I'd read them when I was, or looked at them when I was a child, like when I was 3 years old, and
Mhm.
my father would always be bringing them home, and I started drawing from them and all that, and even selling him my little comics and all that. And
You'd sell them
uh,
to him?
oh yeah, yeah, I'd
Yeah,
have like
nice.
5 cents on it, and then
Wow.
one day I decided to put it up to a quarter, and then he didn't buy it from then on. No, right away. Like no,
Well,
that's
it's
too much. So
inflation. You got to keep up, I mean.
yeah, so I learned my I learned my lesson well. But what it did do was it actually taught me how to read and write,
Mhm.
because by the time I was 5 years old and went into kindergarten, I could read and write.
Wow.
So it really sort of set me ahead. And then I mean I'd read comics here and there throughout my life growing up, but it was when I was I think like 12 or 13, and uh, well, for one thing, I worked at my grandfather's grocery store when I was a kid too.
Hmm.
So and during the summertime, we'd work full time as kids, and
Mm.
so making all kinds of money with nothing to do with it, and that's where I really started buying it. But the first place I started sort of my real collection is just one block up from where I am now. It used to be a drugstore there called Omar Martin, and this is back in the days before comic book stores. This would be in the early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So, and my dad's business is actually right behind where my house is now. It was at the end of the block there. And while he'd be finishing up for the day, I'd come down on a couple hours, and then he'd still be working. So I'd say to him, well, I'm going to go up to the Omar Martin, have a look at the comics, and I'd buy a few things. And I think what really started the entire collection would have been where I decided, besides just looking up them and picking up the odd one, was, I think it was Superboy 200, the marriage of Bouncing Boy and Duo Damsel. That was where I really started to kick in and buying them hand over fist. And a couple of years later, this guy opened a comic book store here called the Escape Hatch, or was originally called now. What was it? Was it Words of Music? I think it was called originally, because they did have some bootleg albums and stuff there.
Okay, cool.
But the guy, he bought out his partner and he turned it into something called the Escape Hatch, and he just went with Pure Comix and he had like an amazing collection of 60s comics, both and 70s comics, DC and Marvel. And like I say, where I was working at my grandfather's store and had all kinds of money left, I just go up and I'd spend my entire check there. So I was buying like Thors from the 60s, Kirby Thors, for like $3 or $4 a piece.
Wow.
I bought out his entire Thor collection, all his Fantastic Four, just about everything I could get my hands on. The Fourth World, I bought all those there.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
And I was buying stuff every week there. Or every 2 weeks, I'd blow my entire check there, which at the time, it'd be maybe $200 or whatever.
Wow.
Or back then, when comics were only 25 cents, brand new ones, it bought a lot of, and then of course I was trading with him up, because I can remember I'd bought a stack, about 30 or 40 copies of Star Wars #1 when it first came out. And over the next couple of years, I used to go in and I'd sell them to him because they were really hot at the time, and they were hard to find. And I was selling them to him for $10 a piece. And I'll never forget when I was with my father one day, and I said, "Oh, just stop here. I'm just gonna run in the comic book store for a second." He's, and of course, you know how some parents are, and he would be like, "Oh, shouldn't you be saving your money, not wasting it that way?" I said, "Oh no," I said, "I'm on my way to sell him something." I said, "I'll tell you about it when I come back." When I came back, I had a bunch of comics, and I said, "I just brought in a comic I paid 35 cents for, I think it was." And I said, and it just been a year or so before. And I said, "I just sold it to him for $10. And my dad never ever said anything from then on, right?
What did your dad do?
He ran a grocery store too, or well, he did a wholesale grocery store. My grandfather, he ran a retail grocery store in downtown St. John's, just off George Street there.
So he understood business then. So he was pretty happy you were deep in commerce at that age.
Oh, well, when he heard that, it was just like, wow. When he worked out, he thought in his mind, I bought it for 35 cents last year or whatever, and sold for 10. Mm-hmm. It just blew him away, the rate of appreciation.
Yeah, well, you can't do that nowadays, that's for sure.
No.
It's very, very rare to find something, even like the things that are big hits right now, even those comics aren't worth that much. Like Walking Dead #1 is probably $300 or $400. It's not crazy. I bought a copy of Fantastic Four #48, and it was in stellar condition too when I bought it. And actually was given to me by a girlfriend at the time. I forgot about that. I didn't even pay, cool girlfriend.
For it. Yeah. But years later, when I had my comic book store, I sold it for $200. Mm-hmm. And but the funny thing was, I'll never forget, because this kid came in and he said, "All I have is $199." And he could barely finish the sentence before I'd snatched the $199 out of his hand and handed him the comic. And I said to him, if you're ever going to resell it, just come back and find me, right? And for years, I always wanted to know who that guy was. And we at the comic book store one time we had a special signing by this guy, Mike Rowe, I think his name was. He was in the Ninjak movie. He played Ninjak.
Oh yeah.
And he was in Arrow as I think he was Deadshot in Arrow.
Yes, he was. He was a Newfoundland actor, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a cool guy.
Yeah, and a really nice guy. And I was chatting to him, and he said, I bought a comic off you one time, and he mentioned
it was him.
And it was him. I said, "Oh,
wow! Did he still have it?"
Oh yeah, and he was quite surprised because I recounted it exactly for him, and I said, "You wouldn't believe how many times I've told the story of that purchase to other people."
Oh,
and now he said at the time. Now, of course, by this time it had gone up quite a bit, but he was actually thinking at the time of selling it for a charity down in LA for a charitable organization, all that. And I said to him, "Well, that's good enough. Yeah, I got it in an omnibus somewhere, right? That's good enough for me, right?"
Oh, that's really nice. That's very cool.
I tell you, and it was in beautiful shape.
Yeah. Wow.
But
he's a cool actor. He's a cool actor.
Yeah. But I and when I bought that Legion of Superheroes, of course, because I'd drawn on and off throughout my life, but then I started to really draw then, and I was drawing, of course, all the characters out of all the comics and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it was 1976, that summer, I went to one of those summer art camp type of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I met this friend of mine, Jerry Porter. And out of everyone else in the class, he was the only other one who was into comics.
Oh, really?
And he was doing his own comics and stuff like that. So, of course, I gravitated right to him instantly. And so we started drawing together and hanging out. We went to ended up going to the same high school together. So we both joined the newspaper there, the high school newspaper, and we did comic strips for them and all that. And
well, I guess you probably wouldn't have too many contemporaries, especially in like a rural place like St. John's a big city, but it's still in the love of comics at that time period. Even like I grew up in the 90s, and even run into another guy in my school as a teenager that still liked comics. There may be one. I don't even know if there was one. It might have just been me. So it's
among all my friends, he was the only one I knew who collected comics.
Mm.
And I went to an all boys school too. I mean, if you mentioned comics back then, as Fraser once said, to paraphrase him, he said they'd beat you to death with a shovel, right? If they found out comics. And but so I mean, I think it was towards in grade 11, which at the time school ended at grade 11, not 12 or 13 like they have it now.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, we decided, hey, let's do our own comic book, and so we started working on a comic together, and it was called Zeitgeist, and it was the first sort of comic book come out of Newfoundland. Now it was only sold in St. John's. Actually, it was only sold at that comic book store, the Escape Hatch.
Oh, cool!
Because you'll see an ad on the back of the copies. Now it was crudely done. I mean it was photocopied and all that, but it wasn't bound like a modern comic book, stapled in the middle. It was just a stack of pages, and they just stapled the ends of it.
That's what I used to do when I was making my comics in high school.
And I was a bit disappointed. I thought of it'd be really cool to have that. And then we both of us went to Memorial University here, and we were both on the newspaper, the Muse, here in St. John's. And so we did comics for them, and using some of the characters and all that. And it became known because we started to attract a lot of other comic book artists and people like that to it. So then I went on, I left Newfoundland. I moved to Toronto for a few years. I went to the Ontario College of Art.
Nice.
or the Ontario College of Art and Design as it's known now. And but back then, I mean, there wasn't even any comics back then.
Yeah.
No comics courses, so I did.
Well,
mainly,
I'm sure the art teachers were kind of probably, hopefully, weren't put their nose up at it, but it certainly wasn't as appreciated as an art form as it's kind of nowadays. It's funny how the amount of money that it makes seems to make it acceptable in the fine art world. Like once it's like, oh, $1 billion movies come out of these things. That's fine. Yes, work on it now. This could be your career.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I had actually in my class, Ty Templeton was in my class.
Oh wow, I'm a big fan of him.
Yeah, and Seth was going there at the same time. I didn't know him that well, but I knew Ty just from being in my class. And there was another guy, Klaus Schoenfeld, who he did some work on the first Mr. X that came out from
yes,
Comics.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, he died very young. He died like a year or so after art school.
Oh wow.
And which was quite a shock to me. But I mean, Ty kept on and went on with it. And now I spent the program was 4 years, but the last year and a half, they had an off-campus studio the college did in New York City. So from 83 to 84, I lived in New York City there.
And did you wander over to the Marvel office when you were there?
No, I never did that, Tom.
Really?
I did in the later 80s, or was it in the 90s? I went there. No, I think it was 88 because it was the anniversary of Superman. But I was going there anyway for a visit, and I was doing an article for a local magazine on comics. So I couldn't get someone to talk to at DC, but at Marvel they said, "Oh yeah, we'll find someone to talk to you." And I walk in, and they put me in this office, and Archie Goodwin walks in.
Oh wow!
And it was just like, holy shit! One of my, because I was a huge fan of the Manhunter series.
Yeah.
And he was the sweetest guy, really nice. He spent an hour with me talking and all that. And I can still remember him showing me these color proofs for this new comic they were putting out, Akira.
Oh, wow.
And he was talking about how good it was. And Moonshadow was the other one.
Ah, yeah. I just talked to not too long ago J.M. Dematteis, who did Moonshadow. That's one of my favorite books. So that's awesome.
And he really sweet guy. And
wow, that's insane.
Yeah,
just wander in and talk to Archie Goodwin for an hour. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was great. I moved back to St. John's, and that's where I ran into Fox, and he was doing some comics, and we got together and we started doing a comic of our own called Toxic, and only 2 issues of that came out. You might find some up in Halifax because we did sell it, I think, through Strange Adventures also. And the second one is the rarer of the two, and the better of the two, because everything about the second one came off a lot better. But now this was a more professional thing, bound with and stapled, the like any normal comic would be, with the color cover but black and white insides, and and it went pretty good. We'd done a 3rd issue, but we ran out of money, and then Fox ended up moving to Halifax, and I still see him every once in a while when he's back in town. He's great. He was a great guy to work with, and he ended up working at this ad agency with me at the time too, when we were doing the comics. So we'd be working during the day, and then at night, once 5 o'clock came, we'd push all the advertising work to the side, and we'd dig out all our own stuff and start working on our own comics then, right?
Was that the gig after art school? Was it in advertising?
Yeah, it was a few years after art school. I'd done a couple of years of advertising at other advertising agencies, and actually my very first gig out of art school was for Codco, and did a comic, this comic strip for them. They were doing it was during the summertime. They were doing a weekly, it was like a weekly soap opera. It was called Live Soap. And it was great though too, because because it was, besides having the members of Codco in it, it also had just about every other actor in St. John's guest starring in some role or whatever. So I got to meet just about everyone in the local arts community all at once.
That's cool.
And
Codco was an interesting sort of phenomenon for those out there listening that don't know. It was sort of the our version, I guess the East Coast version of the sketch comedy sort of show.
yeah, yeah,
That came a little later on. It was we had Royal Canadian Air Farce and Codco and a bunch of other kind of scattered ones. This hour's 22 minutes, but those were like the three big ones.
yeah,
Codco, my
they were
dad
like the
used to
Monty
love.
Python of
Yeah.
I thought, right?
Codco, my dad, I distinctly remember there was some sketch they had where there was some guy in the full rain slick, and he kept talking about the oil. And Dad used to quote it for years. He'd be like, "Oh, that oil," And it was so fun. It still ranks up my head as something that really resonated with him. But it was
Yeah.
it was a very big part of Newfoundland culture as far as like its depiction on Atlantic television, or at least Canadian television.
Yeah, and I mean, Mary Walsh, she was on it. She went down to 22 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Her and Kathy Jones were both in Godco.
Yep.
And along with with this friend of mine, Greg Toomey, who I grew up with.
Oh yeah, I love Greg Toomey. He's they still film 20 minutes in Halifax, and I do a bit of acting. But when I get to work, I do background as well. And I did background on that show one time, and they had me be this really tall. I'm about 6'2". I'm not massively huge, but they had me be some really tall NHL player. I can't remember what his name was, but he used to play for Bruins. He was like 6'8" or something. And they also had me be a writer in a writer's room, and it was just sort of a behind the scenes thing. And Toomey just letting him riff, because they were just they would just let him riff, and it was so funny. It's hard to keep it together when you're just sitting there trying to be like someone, because you just always kind of look at him and not sell the fact that he's being hilarious, because he's supposed to be off-putting in the sketch. But he was so funny. He kept cracking us all up. Like nobody could keep it together, because he just riff, and man, he was funny. Just laugh.
Oh, he was one of the funniest people I knew grown up as well, and especially having grown up in an all boys school and all that. He was free to riff. I'll still remember, of course, the one teacher. What do you think you are? What are you going to do when you grow up? Be a comedian? And he said, "Yep." He's very, very funny guy. I always Greg, I always loved him. And he did some work. I do believe he was in the live soap, but he'd done work with this woman, Janet Spence, who was also involved with Codco and the live soap. But I mean, they were all, like I say, especially where it was a small community, we all knew each other. Even still today, like Mark Critch, for instance, I've known him for many years. He actually is a comic book fan himself.
Oh, that's good. Cool to know. If I ever run into him on the set of that show again, I'll have to bring that up, because I'm a fan of him. He's a cool guy, and the Son of a Crit show is really neat too. And it's kind of one of those there's every once in a while there's like a Canadian show that tends to transcend just the Canadian market. Your Schitt's Creek, or your those sort of things. So that seems to be becoming one of those too, which is very cool.
Yeah,
a Newfoundland guy.
The episode where they go to St. Pierre, and you see a couple of shots of Malcolm McDowell from behind walking up the street or whatever. That's me. I got to go up. He wasn't there now. Mark was there, and other people were there, but Malcolm wasn't there because they'd had to go back to shoot some extra scenes, and so they used me from behind as Malcolm. And even when they fixed up my hair and all that, I'll laugh, because the women who were doing it were like, "Oh my God, you look so much like Malcolm from behind. It's unreal."
Well, that's quite a claim to fame. You can always say I'm the most lookalike to Malcolm McDowell from behind.
As a matter of fact, I'm now doing a comic there's a publication here called the Newfoundland Quarterly. It's actually the oldest magazine in Canada, and it's basically Newfoundland culture, this type of stuff. And I do a comic feature for them called True Newfoundland and Labrador. And the latest one was a story called Life During the Renaissance, and it talks about coming back from OCA and working with Codco and because they were very influential, late 70s and into the 80s. It was what they called the Newfoundland Renaissance. There was another guy, Ray Guy, who was a great writer. It's what spawned your Rex Murphys, And really, Codco was at the forefront of it. With Andy Jones, Kathy Jones, Greg Malone, and Tommy Sexton, and Mary Walsh. I mean, they were all great people, amazing characters. All of them very funny people, and it was just fun hanging out with them. Because I talk about, because most of the arts community all went to this one bar called the Ship Inn. So I mean, you had the cartoonists mixing with the actors and the musicians, and as a matter of fact, I had my wedding party there in the '90s, because the owner, she, we didn't have much money, but she was a good friend of me and my wife at the time, and she had said, no problem, right? So we ended up having our party there, but after Fox left, like I say, I had my comic book store for a while, and then I actually went back to school here at the College of North Atlantic here to update my technical skills, because when I graduated from OCA in '85, there was no such thing as Photoshop or that. So I went back and I did a 2-year course there, which in your 40s, it's actually kind of fun going back to school, because school is a lot easier.
Yeah, I have a recurring dream where I forgot some course and I have to go back to school. Like, I just find out now that they're like, "Oh, you missed some credit or something," and like, I don't know why, but it's incredibly stressful. And the dream is so.
It was like being Rodney Dangerfield, only looking at him at the time, right?
Yeah, that's right. Like one of those sort of comedy sketch or those comedy film sort of premises where it's like, the older fella has to go back to school and learn something. But I mean, like, I grew up learning that, because like when I went to school, I'm a graphic designer by trade, but I do draw comics and stuff too. Nothing I've done lately, but I'm working on something now that's leading into it, because I miss it. It's been, life gets busy, and then you kind of forget. You get busy working on the things that you definitely going to make you money, and kind of forget the things that make you happy that can also make you a little money. So I'm trying to focus on that right now. But so like it must have been interesting going back and seeing that, because now like I'm a little bit into that vein, just I don't have it with me, but learning about the like drawing on a drawing tablet and doing it that way instead. And that's been my recent sort of the new project I'm working on. I'm going to try working on it that way. I just but yeah, like the days of like having to take the art, scan the art, make the then put it on the levels, then draw with or color with a mouse, essentially, because drawing tablets even came a little later that you could plug in and do it that way. Like it's so time consuming, and now you can just do it all in one place. It's insane.
Yeah, well, there's been a bit of a movement back to the old part of it, like where I work with Paul Tucker, this friend of mine. We did a book for Image called Stringer, and a few years ago he moved back to doing the pencil and the ink work by hand, and it was for one reason only, and it was money.
Yeah, sell the art,
to sell the original art.
Yeah.
And I've been at signings with him, and he has sold the original art, and because unfortunately, when people do it all digitally, you can't sell the original art because it's a digital file.
Yes.
So, So I did. So it was great for me that way, because I learned how to do Photoshop. But I had this friend of mine, Daryl Edwards, who actually now lives in Halifax. Funny enough, he's a photographer and he does advertising. Great photographer, and we'd gotten together and we started a comic jam called the 100 Proof Comic Jam, and we used to have it at the aforementioned Ship Inn, the center of the artistic universe here in St. John's at the time, and we did it for a few years, and then I graduated from there, and I was also doing editorial cartoons for the Telegram here at the local paper.
Nice. That must have been an interesting gig, because I know like there's a lot of headlines made when Bruce McKinnon got let go from the Chronicle Herald here in Halifax.
Yeah,
but like he was essentially the beacon of that for decades.
Oh yeah.
So it must be interesting trying to like stay on the pulse of what's new, also make it interesting and make it funny, and every day, right? Like it's
no, I was the Sunday cartoon.
Oh, okay.
which actually was all I wanted anyway.
Hmm.
And it was a bit harder for me though because I'm more of a realistic drawer was at the time and all that. And so as opposed to doing a caricature, I could do a drawing of Craig Chen,
Hmm.
but I couldn't do a caricature of him.
Oh, really?
So it made it a challenge. But I mean, I did it for 8 years, I think it was. And it was funny because in between that, I'd gone to a comic convention 1 year in Chicago,
Hmm.
and I brought along some stuff just to go do one of the portfolio things. And I met this guy from DC, Richard Brunning, who he's married to Karen Berger,
Oh, wow. Okay.
and he was the vice president in charge of scouting and stuff like that. And he liked where I was going and stuff like that. And it's funny because I showed him a few things, and he was just like, "Got anything else?" I said, "Well, I have these rough sketches for this graphic novel, which I'm still working on, about my grandfather and his wartime experiences." And he looked at and he was looking at them. He says, "Why didn't you show me these first?" He said, I said, even because there's no words on them because they were all drawn small. He said, "I can tell what's happening just looking at your rough sketches here."
Mm.
And but I at the time I was still struggling with this. Some of the drawings were so would be so overly precise and all that it would drain the life entirely out of it.
Yeah.
But by working at the on the editorial comics, I used to do every so often. I'd try to get away with multi-panel comics, as much as I could for that.
Hmm.
And I'd done one time, and it struck me like a bolt out of blue. It was just like, this style here. This is the style that I need for that.
Hmm.
And I did. Now I did that gig until they finally fired me, which was what I was looking for. I even said to my late brother one time, I said to him, "I'm trying to get fired," right? So I was making my cartoons more and more controversial until they finally did fire me. And
Well, that's funny because
which
they
I
could
was
just
fiercely
not.
proud of, right?
Well, then you have like some kind of a moral stance that you could stand up and say I was fired for my political ideals, right? Instead of just
My thoughts exactly.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I was now I was doing I was had done some advertising work and stuff like that. But then my wife got sick and she died in 2005, and so I was here for about a year. But in 2006, I moved back to New York for a few years, and ended up actually staying or crashing in my friend's studio, who I was with there in the 80s. He was still living there.
Oh, wow.
A guy by the name of Carter Costera, and he was doing work for Barney's New York, and he would do like he would do their change areas. He'd become known for his silhouettes,
Oh, okay.
and so he'd do a silhouette, say, of me, and then he'd have a tagline at the bottom like Wallace has a fascination for shoes or whatever.
Mm.
So each portrait would have the like I say, the silhouette, the name of the person, and the tagline going along with it. And he'd actually done it for a big insurance company down there. I can't remember the name of it now. And he'd done their annual report, and of course, then it just went insane. And they came along and they had him doing, and he'd cover for Barney's New York. He'd cover their entire change area with hundreds of heads.
Oh, wow.
With little names and taglines, and we had it down. It took us about a year after I got there, and we basically started making stencils for all the heads and all that. And while he was stenciling, painting the heads, because he liked my lettering, from my comic book days, I'd go along and I'd letter the names and the taglines to go with it and stuff like that. So it was a great gig because we went from everywhere from LA to San Francisco to Texas, Florida. He sent me to London for a day, London, England. And I mean a day. I arrived there 9 o'clock in the morning. I did this quick gig I think it was for AOL. It was at a party where
Oh, wow.
just drawing drawing the silhouettes and putting in, basically being his representative there.
Mhm.
And then 12 o'clock the next day, I got back on the plane, was back in New York the next day.
Well, at least you got to stay overnight.
Oh yeah, so it was worst case of jet lag I ever had in my life, right? And actually, while I was living there, at one point I'd gotten I actually dropped by DC one time, and because I called and I got hold of Richard Running again, and I just wanted for him to have a look at my artwork and stuff like that to see, because I'd been working on it since the last time I'd seen him, and it really started to come into my own and all that. And we had a great chat. Went in, had a great chat with him and all that. And as I was leaving, I can still remember he said to me, he said, you're the most natural storyteller I've ever seen.
Wow.
And I took that I took it as a compliment, because he was not the type of guy. He even said, if I don't think, because he was the one who basically put me on the path and told me that I had to loosen up. And, because he showed me the last time we'd met the difference between my finished pieces and my sketches. And he says, you got to have that freedom that you have in your sketches in your finished comics.
Almost too refined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it had taken a while, but he even said, you're almost there. You're almost there though, right? And so I mean that was great. And then I moved back here then what was it, 2009, after the economic crash. Our basically all the business that we were doing for people, it just dried up. But I mean, it was still a great time to be in New York. I mean,
I'd imagine.
I mean, hung out with him, and I mean, met all kinds of different people from. Met Bono on the street one day. He was singing to a group of people.
You must have been quite a novelty hanging out with local New Yorkers. Being, a Newfoundlander.
Well, to them, I would sound English or Irish.
Yeah, I can see that. Irish, right? For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, when I went to Ireland, it was like, you hear the thick Irish voice and you're like, yeah, I can see where the Newfoundland, because a lot of Irish immigrants went up in Newfoundland. You can see how it became what it became.
And I was at one convention one time, and I was waiting in line to see Darren Cook. And there was this woman at his table working, and she was talking to the person at the table next to her. And I heard her mention Halifax. I said, "Oh, Halifax." I said, "Oh, you guys are from right next door from where I grew up, at Newfoundland." And she looked at me. She said, "I'm from Newfoundland." It was Darren's wife, Marcia.
Yeah, Marcia. Yeah, Darwin. Yeah. She was great.
So me and her ended up gabbing, blah blah blah. We were talking for the longest time, and because Darren was just there doing drawings for people and everything like that. Yeah. And eventually he came over and she introduced me to him. Oh, this is Wallace. He's from Newfoundland too, right?
That's awesome. No, Darren was great. I got to know him a little well when he was here before he passed away. Yeah, he was such a lovely guy.
He did a little drawing for me of Popeye.
Oh yeah.
And I said to him, "Why Popeye?" And he said, because you sound like Popeye to me.
I have one of his. I don't know if you can see it up there, but there's a Spider-Man. He did.
Oh, okay.
One. Yeah, that one. Yeah. So they did that at Free Comic Book Day one day. It was pretty great.
Nice guy. I ran into him at the New York Comic Con about a year later, and I was just walking by, and I was dressed all in white, and I had white hair too at the time, and I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And he looked at me, and he was just like, I could tell he was like struggling, like he knew who I was.
He's like, God.
And I said, "Popeye." Yeah. And he says, yes. And I said, "How's Marcia doing?" And all that. And we had a bit of a chat, and then he said, after a bit of a talk, he said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" Like, I said, No. I said, "Listen, you're busy," because it was around lunchtime. He hadn't just been at a table by himself drawing. I said, "You're obviously up to your eyes here. I just had to drop by and say hi and whatever."
Oh, that's lovely.
But sweet, super sweet guy. Well, when I came back to St. John's, I started to work. Myself and Paul Tucker, we started the Breakdown Comic Jam here in St. John's, which is going into its 15th year now.
Oh, lovely. That's awesome.
Next year. And him and I, he's an amazing drawer, great colorist, everything like that. And we'd always talked about, oh, geez, we got to do something together. We talked about it for years. And he got a job with Black Mask, and he'd hooked up with this guy, Patrick Kinlan, the writer. And he said to me, do you want to do the lettering for me? He says, I'm doing all the artwork and all that. But I said, sure, why not? I said, it gives us a chance finally to do something together.
Yeah.
And it was great fun. I'd have him pulling up in his car next to my house, and it must have looked something very suspicious, because he'd come and hand out these envelopes to me, and I'd hand back envelopes to him and run back into the house and all that. And
nice. Get the neighbors talking.
Oh, yeah. And then we did one for Image, the Stringer graphic novel, which was an amazing piece. He did, and usually I get to ink 2 pages out of most of. He even makes sure that there's something that I can ink somewhere along the line. And we actually did do one proposal which didn't go anywhere, but it was basically a super group, and when they do the flashback scenes, I'd ink the flashback scenes.
Oh, fun.
Because then it would change his style just enough to look like someone completely different, right? And we're working on some more books now with Patrick. We got a bunch of books done and in the can, waiting for publication. But
awesome. Wow.
We're working, as a matter of fact, I'm waiting now. He's going to be sending me a script now on a new one, and I enjoy the hand lettering, because it's and the people at Black Mask, they loved it because it made it distinctive.
Yeah, it's not something we see so much anymore.
Yeah, well, exactly, and it's funny because we had we were at this comic event here, and we were talking to one comic book artist from away, whose name eludes me now. I'm going to kick myself for that. But Paul mentioned how we do hand lettering, and he said, because Wallace is much faster than getting it done by machine. And Buddy said, you can't be faster than doing it, by machine. And he said, oh yes, he's much faster, right? And and we do get people, because we had him, Scott Chandler.
Oh yes, yeah.
And at the same one, Jason Lutz was at the same event here.
Oh, nice.
And we ended up being there was another event here a few years later, and we ended Ho Chi Anderson was down here.
Wow.
And he ended up
pretty good names.
Oh yeah, so he's a big friend of the local Newfoundland community. Everyone loved Ho Chi. He was great. But Mike Feehan, who does the Star Trek comics for IDW now, and he'd done the Snagglepuss Chronicles for DC.
He did the art on those? Yeah, right. Yeah. He did with Mark Russell.
Yeah. I taught him comics.
Oh wow, really? That Snagglepuss comic was very cool.
Well, same with Paul. Paul was actually in my first class ever. The first time I ever taught comics many years ago. Paul was a teenager, and he was in my very first class, and here we are now working together, right? Which is ever so cool, right?
That's awesome.
We had Chester Brown down here a couple of weekends ago.
Wow.
And Suk and Lee were doing their Paying For It tour.
Right. Yes.
For the film, and I got to meet him, and he was a sweetie. He was, I got to say.
When is that coming out? I've been looking. I've recently heard about the film.
Oh, the movie is out there. Yeah, and they were doing a tour playing. It played at the local film festival here, and I keep seeing mentions because I have her on Facebook. I keep seeing them. They're going from town to town promoting it. And
that's cool. Suk and Lee did it. I just saw a movie she was in at the film fest here in town, in Halifax this past year. Darkest Miriam, I think it was called, but she was in it. I think she had something to do with it as well.
And funny enough, I'd been, like I say, Seth was in OCA same time I was, but I'd also become friends online with Joe Matt,
Oh yeah.
because, but mainly because I was buying books off him, and we ended up talking about TV shows and all that type of stuff together. And
Hmm.
and as a matter of fact, I have one book, and I said to him, will you just put from the collection of Joe Mad on the inside front cover for me, if you will. And when I got it, there was a drawing there of him,
Aw.
from the library of Joe Matt, blah, 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 blah. It was just like, oh man, you didn't have to do that, but thanks, right?
Well, did you find your style kind of just looking at your work? Like, do you find as the years went on and like the underground, obviously, it was a lot of influence for you from the mainstream, but like just looking at your work, it reminds me a lot of some of the underground comics, like the stuff that was coming out with American Splendor, or even like not
Yeah.
so much Crumb, but like the I wouldn't say it's like stylistically the same, but definitely the way it's presented in a sense. Like,
Oh,
is
yes.
that a big cultural shift for you when it came to like your artwork and what you're doing with it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because even though I still love reading superhero comics and all that, I became more, and even in the class with Ty and Klaus, they were more of the superhero crowd.
Hmm.
But I was more the heavy metal crowd.
Ah, yes,
I,
yeah, that makes
Myself
sense.
and my friend Jerry, who when we did the magazine together, he was very much a Mobius fan.
Oh, nice.
And
Yeah,
so
also great.
yeah, and I was a Mobius and a Philip Drouillet and a Richard Corbin fan. But it's funny you should mention Harvey, because Harvey became. I mean, I loved American Splendor.
Mhm.
As a matter of fact, when I had my comic book store, I had a customer come in and hand me a stack of American
Oh, really?
Splendors.
Wow. I have mostly just the collections. I don't have any single issues. I think I might have some of the single ones he did a little later on with Vertigo, but
Yeah,
but not any of the old ones for sure. I love that
yeah.
movie too. It's a great movie.
And it was funny because I was introduced to American Splendor by my friend Carter from New York City, because I was down there. Actually, it was in '88, the same time I had the interview.
Hmm.
He had to go somewhere some night, and he said, here's some comics for you to read, and threw them into my lap, and they were American Splendor. And I started reading them. I was like, this shit is amazing.
Hmm.
I fell in love with it, and still to this day, I mean, all the stuff that I do for the Newfoundland Quarterly,
Hmm.
it's because basically it's whatever the theme of the issue is, and Newfoundland more or
Yeah.
less got to be the subject of it.
Yeah.
So, like the last one, the Newfoundland Renaissance, but I always do it from an autobiographical point of view.
Hmm.
So I'm in every single one of my comics I do, whether I'm talking about it. There was one where it was sort of it was a story. So I told stories about growing up and my grocery store
Hmm.
stories, and um, and generally I'm the narrator.
Yeah. Very
Another one
American
was,
Splendor. Yeah.
yeah, and one was the legality of fairies, and it was talking about the belief that Newfoundlanders had in fairies and the little people,
Hmm.
and it lasted right into the 1800s, because I'd found a case, and this is the other fun thing about it. It's been given a topic and researching it to
Yeah.
find something, and I found a case from the 1800s in which a guy had sued his employer because he'd been taken away by the fairies, and he wanted compensation for those days, and he won his case.
That's
But
amazing. That's
but
amazing.
one of my favorites though was Hollywood. Hollywood was the theme. So it
Uh,
was like Hollywood and Newfoundland. How the heck do I do this?
yeah.
And I just put in Hollywood actors, Newfoundland into Google, and of course, Mary Walsh, Andy Jones, all the usual suspects came
Yeah,
up.
there's some good ones. Like Mark O'Brien is really cool, and
Yeah,
yeah, like the stuff like the Righteous movie he made that's in Newfoundland is really neat. They filmed that movie The King's Tide there, I think, which is also a really cool movie. There's
yeah,
some really neat stuff there.
yeah,
I
and
think I
Rare
think the Mod
Birds.
movie was filmed there, oddly enough, even though it's a
Yeah,
Nova Scotian story.
yeah,
But I think it was cheaper at the time. Our film credit was messed up, and it wasn't that cheap to film back in Nova Scotia. So, but
yeah, and Rare Birds by Ed Rich, which is it's a great film. It unfortunately
no,
it had the unfortunate it was unfortunately released the week of 9/11.
no, yeah. Well,
But
that'll put a
but
damper on anything.
but the film is worth seeing. It had William Hurt in it, and
Oh, I'll have
he's
to watch it up. That's awesome. I love William
yeah,
Hurt.
and apparently even he was just amazed standing across from Andy Jones and watching Andy Jones, like, and he was just like, where did this guy come from? Because Andy does an amazing job in it.
Well, Molly Parker was also a big crush of mine when
Yeah.
I was a little kid. So,
Yeah.
it's nice seeing her and stuff for sure.
Well, when I was looking through it, I said, okay, who's the most obscure one out of all of these? And I come across an actor by the name of Hazen Gifford.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the name of the strip is Who is Hazen Gifford? And he was a guy, he was born in Newfoundland, but he moved away. I better run.
They're coming to get you.
But I looked it up. He was born in Newfoundland and he moved away at the age of 3 or 4 or whatever, and moved to the States. And he ends up he grows up there, and his actually, funny enough, his roommate in college was the father of Matthew Broderick.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
wow.
So Hazen ends up on Broadway, and he'd been in a couple of famous Broadway plays in the 50s.
Wow.
And in the 60s, he'd gotten on some soap operas and a couple of other film things, stuff like that. And he appears briefly on Kojak in a Kojak episode.
Yeah.
And it's more or less like that.
He's an episode of the Cosby Show.
Yeah, Cosby Show.
Right. Yeah, interesting.
And Brubaker, he was in the Brubaker movie. And so once I found these, I went through them and found him in each of them and screen grabbed all of them because there were no pictures of him online. Mm-hmm. Absolutely nothing. And the only way I got any kind of information about him was that I'd found a marriage notice for his son.
Huh.
His son get married to this woman, and I thought, okay, this, because it said that parents Hazen Gifford, and I said it got to be him.
Yeah,
Chris Gifford was the name. So I looked this guy up. I can't find anything about him. So I look up his wife, and I find his wife easily on Facebook. Mm-hmm. So I message her and tell her what I'm doing, and she's like, no problem, I'll give Chris your email address and he'll get in touch with you. And he emailed me, and he shared with me a lot of information about his dad and stuff like that. But the best part of it was, and I included it in the piece, and probably the reason that I wasn't able to find him was that he was a vice president, or he's a vice president at Nickelodeon.
Oh.
And as it turns out, he's the co-creator of Dora the Explorer.
Oh, well, there you go.
And of course, but I was doing the piece, I had to include that. It was just like, oh, this is just too rich. So sometimes even making the comics is a bit of an exploration and a bit, and in some ways a bit of detective work.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, it was really great talking with you, Wallace. This is fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to. I'm going to pick up Stringer. It looks really cool, and I look forward to reading the other stuff as well. So,
and check out our In the Library of Graphic Literature YouTube show, because we did our 300th anniversary.
Oh wow! Okay, great. I'll link it on on the show to this as well.
Yeah, just last week, and I do one with another friend of mine, Dennis Osborne. It's called Thursday Comics, and it's a podcast.
Oh,
but it's not a podcast for young people, because it's not X-rated, but
this is cursing. This is whatever you want on this one too. Okay. I mean, it's not for young people either.
Well, the Thursday Comics one, it's chock-a-block with the. As a matter of fact, we're proud when we can label the thing with what is the phrase they have, illicit content?
Explicit content.
There.
Yeah. Yeah, I always click that button when I do this show as well, when I upload them, just to make sure, because you never know. Like it slides out a lot when I talk to people. I mean, sometimes I'll talk to someone that's like I know I talked to Richard Cumley, who created Captain Canuck. And,
yes.
He's a fairly religious guy, I believe. So, I try to keep it in touch then. I feel the funniest slip too, it's when I talked to him, he mentioned he had a bottle in front of him, and it looked like a whiskey bottle. And he was talking about how this was, it had Captain Canuck on it. And I was like, is that like Captain Canuck whiskey? And he's like, no, never. He's like, it's maple syrup. He was like, and it was like, I felt like I mildly offended him just because I might have connected Captain Canuck with alcohol, which I thought was really funny. I was like, oh, and it was fine, but it was a fun chat. But anyway, thanks so much, Walt. This is awesome. It's a real joy, and if I make it back up to St. John, I look forward to maybe coming by and seeing the library.
Oh, there is a tour in your future, and I'll have have a cup of tea and a cup of coffee with you just up the street.
That sounds lovely. All right, I look forward to it.
Okay, take care,
All
man.
right, bye-bye.
Yeah.
There you have it, my festive chat with Wallace Ryan. I love the fact he lives in a house that is older than Canada itself. That is an insane fact, and one that is super, super cool. But, deep part of the comic industry in Newfoundland, I was very happy to talk to Wallace, and what an honor, what a pleasure to talk to a guy that's been making his own comics for so long, and such a diverse and interesting array of stories all relating around the comic industry in Atlantic Canada. So, I really, really, really enjoyed that. And big thanks to Davin, our guest acquisitioner, I guess I'll call him today, for getting that interview, because I really enjoyed it. It was a blast, and I look forward to getting to visit Wallace someday. Next time I'm in Newfoundland, hopefully. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah, Crazy Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate. I hope you do it with your family. I hope you have surrounded by loved ones. I hope it's a time of joy and wonderful memories, and cuddling up with loved ones, and experiencing the true magic that the holiday can sometimes bring. And if you're not with family, not with loved ones, and you're alone on the holiday, I want you to know that in spirit, I'm with you. I know that doesn't mean a lot, but we've all been lonely from time to time, and being lonely during the holidays is a really hard time to be lonely. So this too shall pass. You'll get through it, and life will get back to normal soon. But I hope you will you find someone that you can spend some time with, a friend, a family member, anyone, to enjoy the holidays, because they're meant to be celebrated with loved ones, with friends, if possible. But I'm very thankful once again for you guys for listening, tuning in. You folks got to get away from using guys. I've been trying to teach myself. It's not like some big woke thing. I'm like, I can't say guys anymore. It's not the reason. It's mostly just because, it's not representative of often the groups of people that I'm talking to. I'll be picking up trivia sheets and I'll be like, thanks, guys. And nobody in that trivia team are guys. So I know it's kind of one of those phrases that's sort of been adopted in different ways. But, trying to be a little more tighter with my language when it comes to addressing certain individuals. We do live in a world where not everybody fits into the binary system that we all thought it did for many, many years, and it's important to make an effort, even a small one, to try to be inclusive, and I'm working on it. So, but happy holidays. I'm super happy you guys are tuning in. Show's continuing. We'll be back next year with season 6. Be one more episode, I think, before the new year, and then that'll be the end of season 5, and then we'll motor along with a new color scheme, new guests, and pretty much the same format, rolling into 2025. Very excited about it. It's hard to believe it's been quite a while since I started the show, and we're going to keep going. I'll reflect a little bit upon that when it gets closer to New Year, but hope you have a Merry Christmas, a happy holiday, and I hope you get to read some comics while doing it. Enjoy the season. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.